Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about the opportunities for UK exporters in the Commonwealth, brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade. And what a time to be hosting such a webinar shortly after the Platinum Jubilee and as Commonwealth leaders are arriving in Kigali as we speak for the Heads of Government meeting. Indeed, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has today said that the Commonwealth has a super fertiliser for prosperity, noting that Commonwealth GDP is set to grow by 50% over the next 5 years. So today's webinar is certainly well timed. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here you will see that we're covering various aspects of trade with the Commonwealth, covering UK trade policy and ongoing trade deal negotiations first, before going into further depth about some of the on-the-ground opportunities and support for UK exporters in Commonwealth markets. We'll then cover some of the recent trends and challenges that experts have observed in UK Commonwealth trade, before going on to answer some of your questions. So please note that we will be bringing in your questions at multiple points throughout this webinar. On the next slide, so you'll here see that we have 3 of the UK's leading policy and trade experts when it comes to doing business in the Commonwealth. You'll hear first from Paul McComb, the Director of UK Exports at the Department for International Trade, who you'll see has been at DIT since its inception in 2016 and has vast experience leading the government's support for exporters. Dr. Salamat Ali from the Commonwealth Secretariat will then be covering some of the opportunities that are out there for exporters, and you'll see from the slide that Salamat has a serious academic and practical understanding of the impact of policy on trade. And finally, the Chair of the Institute's Academic Board and Professor of Economics at Bournemouth University, Sangeeta Khurana, will then be joining us from Kigali itself. Sangeeta will be talking about some of the trends and challenges she's observed in UK trade with Commonwealth markets in recent years. So a genuine heavyweight panel of trade policy experts, I hope you agree. But on the next slide, I'm just going to launch our first poll for today's webinar. It's a simple one, asking, do you already trade with the Commonwealth? The options there are yes, a considerable amount, yes, a little, no, we don't, but intend to, no, we don't and don't have plans to. So I'll give you a few seconds to answer that poll. First, just while you're doing that, I'll give a couple of housekeeping notes. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions today, though please note we cannot guarantee that we will be able to get to every question in the allocated time. As such, I'll be prioritizing questions that are relevant to the wider audience, so I won't be going into company or sector-specific queries as such, but we'll try to get to as many things as we can. Finally, you will receive access to today's slide pack, as well as a recording of the webinar in a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. So I'll give you just a few more seconds to answer that poll. A small countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to share the results. So thank you everyone for answering as ever. 23% of you already do a considerable amount of trade with the Commonwealth and 30% of you do a little. So over half of you at least doing some trade with the Commonwealth. 31% of you don't but intend to, and 17% don't and don't have plans to. But hopefully this webinar will be informative for all of you, whatever your situation. So if we could have the slides back up, please. Phil, if you could just share your screen. And on at this point, it is my delight to pass over to Paul from the Department for International Trade to say a little bit about the ongoing work from government to facilitate and support trade with the Commonwealth. Over to you, Paul.
Brilliant, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Will. I've got to say, I always enjoy these sessions with the Institute, particularly when I look at the credentials pardon me, of Salamat and Sangeeta. And I know they're going to bring a lot of real deep expertise to the conversation. What I thought I would do is a few things. First of all, talk a little bit about the scale of the trade that we have and the trading relationship that we have with the Commonwealth and the UK. Say a little bit about the sort of trade deals that we've got, the trade arrangements we have in place, and our ambitions in that space. I think importantly, I would like to then go on and say a little bit more about how do we turn those really strong commitments that are made in trade deals into practical opportunities for businesses so that they can actually do some real trade in all directions. So in that context, I'll share a little bit about how we plan to do that and some of the services that we can provide that you can tap into that can help you on the journey. And I clocked the 31% in your poll there, Will, saying that they would like to trade and they're considering it, and actually the 17% who aren't, see if we can get those folks helped, interested and involved in trade between the UK and the Commonwealth. So just in terms of scale of trade, around 10% of UK's exports go to Commonwealth countries, and that was in 2021. And that represents about 60 billion in value. In investment terms, it's a significant amount of UK outward investment into Commonwealth countries, about 150 billion in 2020 alone. So you can see there's a very serious and strong economic relationship. At the kind of policy side, we have 33 trade deals in place already between UK and Commonwealth countries, and around 15 of the Commonwealth countries benefit from reduced tariffs with a developing nation status. And you will know, and you'll have clocked already, that actually if you look at all the trade deals that this department has been pushing and securing since the 1st of January 2021, quite a lot of that is dominated again in the Commonwealth. So you've got Australia, which was the first deal we got through there in December 2021, New Zealand in February 2022. We have a digital trade agreement with Singapore, which was signed back in February and came into force just last week. And now, not a full trade deal, but then Singapore is a very open economy anyway, but actually some very important enablers in digital trade, which I think is important. We've got a UK-Kenya economic partnership agreement, a UK-Ghana trade partnership agreement back in March 22. We're in round 4 of UK-India negotiations. The Indian team have been in the UK this week. And as you know, we're in talks with Canada and others as well. So we are not, we're not sitting off this, and we are definitely pursuing the best we can in terms of mutual trading arrangements between the UK and Commonwealth countries. And it's really important for us to do that with our friends, given the history of the Commonwealth and the relationship between us all. So hopefully from a policy perspective, you can see a lot of activity there. But one of the biggest challenges is how you then convert all of those policy gains or tariff gains or regulatory alignment or regulatory changes, and how you convert that into deals that businesses can take advantage of so that they are benefiting from these agreements. So late last year, November last year, we sort of took the opportunity to reset the government's export strategy. In part, that was frankly because we've been through the period of Brexit negotiations. The pandemic was still, I mean, we weren't out of it then, but we were coming, we hoped, to a better place on the journey through the pandemic, and it felt the right time to start to reset the sort of export ambitions for this department of the government. And the government did set out a sort of 12-point plan I've got a copy here, which we can get a link through to you all through the Institute. But that set out 12 practical actions, and I'm not going to go through all 12 of them, but they were all designed in mind to deal with the barriers that get in the way of most companies trading. And there's 4 very persistent barriers that they try to tackle through this strategy. The first one is the knowledge to actually understand, well, what do I actually need to do? What are the practical things I need to do? So how we build up knowledge. Secondly, it's around businesses' own capacity to grow in order to fulfill orders, particularly in the goods sector. I mean, services equally applies. Thirdly, it's building trust in overseas networks and being confident that you can find buyers that you can trust and you can do business with. And then fourthly, and very importantly, the cost. And what we did was take a very forensic look at those barriers and say, well, what is it that we in government can do? Recognizing we're not the only form of support. Indeed, the Institute are hugely successful in what they do, as are some other organizations. But a few of the things that I did want to draw attention to. First is a service we launched last year called the Export Support Service. In fact, the Institute play a role within that. And this is both a telephone service and a digital online service where you can pretty much ask any question you want in relation to trading. And at the moment, that service has been focused on Europe and the changes as a result of the UK-EU trade deal. More laterally, we've expanded the service to cover the impact of the war in Ukraine, but we are planning to expand that during the course of the next 12 months to cover every nation in the globe that we trade with. And what we would anticipate as we build that service out is people who want to trade with a particular country in the Commonwealth who've got questions about, what do I need to do? They can approach this service and get on the journey of what they need to either learn. We'll do some diagnostics around knowledge, networks, etc., in order to work out which of our services is best able to support you. So we've got an export academy to help people build up their knowledge. We've got international teams all over the world in 108 countries, and they are there to give you some market insight and help you get that first trusted relationship with potential buyers overseas. We're looking at things like grant funding. So if there are missions or trade shows that you'd be able to, we compensate some of the cost of going on those, and sometimes there's nothing like that to help businesses really build up confidence in wanting to trade. So I guess from my perspective, the important thing is that what we are doing is taking those deals, converting them into, what are the practical benefits those deals give you in terms of trading overseas, and then help you familiarize yourself, build your knowledge, build your capability in order to make some additional trade happen. So I guess my takeaway, the messages rather I'd leave you with are kind of one, on the policy side, we're unrelenting in our ambition to get really strong trading relationships with Commonwealth countries. 2, we're trying to follow that through to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for you to take advantage of those deals. And 3, we're in listening mode all the time. So if all the things I've described today aren't working, if there's more we can do, this department in particular wants to know. And that's why these calls are brilliant, because it's an opportunity for us to hear what businesses are really facing, and then for us to think about, well, actually, can we do something about that? Because that's what we're here for, driving up exports and increasing bilateral trade. So, Will, I will probably stop there and back to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's ever really interesting to hear the support from DIT, and great to see so much going on at that trade policy, trade deal negotiation level. I've just posted a link in the chat to the 12-step plan from government, so I hope that's useful for everyone. If we go into the next slide, though, I'm just going to launch our next poll. And this is asking you, what would you most like to see from the UK's trade negotiations with Commonwealth markets? The options there are reduction in tariffs and quotas, visas and improved working rights, mutual recognition of rules and standards, greater ease of setting up operations in market, and the greater digitalization of cross-border trade data flows. So I'll give you, again, a few minutes to respond to that. And as you're doing so, Paul, as ever, we've had some good questions come in from our audience. The first one is from Jane, and a few people have asked this. Jane's asked, how will British traders know when they can make use of new trade agreements, and what support will be on offer for them to progress new trading opportunities?
Good question, and hopefully you've got a sense of some of the answer to that from the conversation or the point I was making before. But in a really practical sense, the first thing we will do is publicize that. And, we tend to put this out through press releases, social media, you name it. So we try and get the message out and make some noise that the deal is coming into force so that people are at least alive to it. We do work with business representative organizations closely so that through their networks, they also promulgate that message. We have, however, launched, and some of the messaging will be under a new campaign, which some of you may have seen already, the sort of Made in the UK, Sold to the World. And we will use that sort of campaign in order to capture people's attention. So when new deals are done or new measures are secured, that will be the sort of brand, if you want, that people can hopefully start to get familiar with in a practical sense. Typically what we've done, if I take this, say the Japan deal, we would just organize lots. I mean, Japan was during the during the kind of pandemic, but we organized a virtual trade mission. 200 British companies participated. Sorry, 2,000 companies participated. 35 virtual events. So we tend to want to get enough partners together and businesses together and to start talking in some detail about what the trade deal means and what benefits it brings. The one thing I would say, though, is that one thing that we did get access to as a result of some new legislation last year was HMRC data. And if you can imagine, in the trade deals, you're negotiating, the commodities that would benefit from, or the goods that would benefit from the deal. Actually, we can in the future, we're still working this through at the moment, run scans with HMRC to say who are the companies that are trading these goods. And I think we'll probably get much more targeted in the way we target businesses and start to say to them, listen, your goods benefit from this deal. We know that's the case. Is there anything you need to know from us? And then our export support service can work with those companies.
Thanks, Paul. And yeah, I mean, with the trade agreements, any of the publicity which is coming out from government, we publish that in our daily updates. So that's a good way of people keeping in touch as well. I'm just going to share the results of that poll because, as ever, thank you everyone for answering, really revealing. So 39% of you said a reduction in tariffs and quotas would be the most important thing from negotiations, only 8% on visas and working rights. 16% of you recognition of rules and standards, 19% ease setting up in operations, and 70% digitalization. So thank you, that's really interesting. But Paul, we do have another question just before we move on to Salamat. Catherine has asked, to get export support from DIT, does a business have to expose its financial data, for example, revenue profits?
No. I mean, we do ask questions like, broadly speaking, what's your turnover? How many employees have you got? By and large, that's to help us understand which type of companies use our services. So we want to know, is it micros, SMEs, large companies, those sorts of things. But no, you don't have to do a sort of full open book disclosure to get support from DIT.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you as well for the questions, everyone. Keep them coming. It's all great stuff. But yeah, at this point, I'll say thank you to Paul. And on the next slide, it's my delight to welcome on Salamat, who's going to talk more about the kind of specific opportunities and where they lie for exporters in the Commonwealth. So over to you, Salamat.
Thanks, William, and very good afternoon to my fellow panelists and 190 attendees which are currently listening to this webinar. I must say the Institute of Exports is doing a great job for creating these opportunities for UK exporters, and our partnership with the Institute is going from strength to strength, and this is the third joint event which we are doing in this couple of 4 months. May I request you to move to next slide, please? Colleagues, the next 9 to 10 minutes, what I would like to do, I give you just brief of the Commonwealth, and then I discuss 3 main issues which are interest for UK's firms. One is about the situation of current UK Commonwealth trade linkages. I know Paul has touched it, and I will go into further detail. And then I will discuss the nature of UK's trade regime for Commonwealth member countries. And finally, I will walk you through about the potential of UK Commonwealth trade linkages. What I will do, I will try to discuss the both sides of the trade, exports as well as imports. So normally firms and countries are more interested in exports, but being an economist, I believe that access to good quality, cheaper imports, raw material and machinery is equally important to produce for export markets. Next slide, please. Please, this is a snapshot of Commonwealth, what the Commonwealth is. It was very happy to see that 50% people are already engaged with Commonwealth. Maybe this can motivate the remaining 50% to do more trade with Commonwealth countries. So Commonwealth is a voluntary association of 54 countries, and that work together for prosperity, democracy, and peace. And these 54 countries are spread across 6 continents of the world, starting from Australia to the west coast of South America. And economic cooperation is the key for promoting democracy and peace, and trade is the key for the economic cooperation. Giving you the size of the Commonwealth countries' trade, last year in 2021, Commonwealth countries exported goods and services worth 4 trillion, and that is about 15% of the world trade. So it means here we are talking about the big size of the market. And intra-Commonwealth trade, which is between 54 member countries, last year was estimated at 768 billions, and that is on average 19% of members' global trade. And we have this mandate from Commonwealth heads of government to expand intra-Commonwealth trade to 2 trillion by 2030. And this mandate will be reaffirmed in the ongoing heads of the government meeting in Kigali. So as you know, Commonwealth is not a formal trade bloc, but there are different kind of arrangements. I will come to that. But there are many advantages for trading with the Commonwealth, because what we have seen in the data again and again, when 2 Commonwealth countries trade with each other, trade is 20% more, investment is 27% higher, and bilateral trade costs are 21% lower. So we will pick up some of these themes as we move on. Next, please. So this is the snapshot of UK's exports and imports with a Commonwealth country over the last 6 years. So we have data for 2016 to 2020, and 2021 is mainly the estimates. A couple of things which are very evident from this data, that UK exports around 75 billion of goods and services to Commonwealth countries, and there is a similar volume of imports. So it's a very kind of plateau relationship to trade. It has grown recently in 2021, maybe a rebound from the pandemic, and maybe also the result of reorientation of UK's trade policy. Another thing we have seen that there is a dip in trade in 2020, which was for all over the world. So there is a drop in UK's export to the Commonwealth, as well as drop in UK's imports from the Commonwealth. But please keep this number of 2020 in view. I will come back to that again. Another thing which you can see is, if you add exports and imports, look at the both sides of the market. So Commonwealth has a trade of around 160 to 200 billions with the UK. That is a huge trade volume if we want to see the both sides of the coin. Next, please. So this is slightly a breakup of goods and services. Chart A is on merchandise, chart B is about services. Merchandise trade is slowly going down as countries are moving more and more to the services trade. And services trade, I believe, is much more for the UK's exporter because 80%, more than 80% of the UK's GDP comprises of services. But these charts may give a bit distorted picture. The better picture comes when you see the share of Commonwealth countries in UK market, which is shown on the next slide. Next, please. Yes. So here you can see the share of UK's merchandise exports and imports and share of services exports and import with the UK over the period of last couple of years. Around 8% of UK's goods export end up in Commonwealth market, and around 9% imports originate from Commonwealth countries. Export pattern has been very stable, but imports have been fluctuating. One interesting thing you see in this data that in 2020, UK imported more stuff from Commonwealth countries. Maybe it is medicine-related stuff, COVID-related, personal protective equipment, gloves, so these kind of things were shipped from Malaysia, Indonesia, and other countries, and Bangladesh. But the interesting thing is the large share of services trade with Commonwealth members. The share of services from the UK, which are destined to Commonwealth countries, is around 11%, and they are increasing. And we see the rise from 2018 onwards, and we have similar share of services import from the Commonwealth countries. So more services trade and relatively stable merchandise trade. Next, please. So this is a snapshot of trade regime, of UK's trade regime for 54 Commonwealth countries. So you can see there is a whole range of arrangements. Some countries have full FTAs, some have partial FTAs, provisional FTAs, bridging mechanisms, GSP, GSP plus, and finally, only few countries have trade with the UK on MFN basis. And this is very dynamic situations, as Australia and New Zealand have signed the agreement. Maldives is also negotiating agreement. So this is most and more countries are moving toward FTA regime. So it might be worth keeping in view while you decide to export or import with the UK markets. So this preferential nature of UK's trade regime for Commonwealth countries indicates UK's development-friendly trade regime, because many of these countries are LDCs. And one interesting thing which I see from this data, that greater is the level of integration, the more is the share of trade between Commonwealth countries. For example, the countries which have FTAs with the UK, so UK sends more goods to them compared with those countries which have provisional FTAs and bridging mechanism or GSP framework. So this illustrates the need for more deeper integration with Commonwealth countries, which Paul and his team is doing. Next, please. So now I'm coming to the third and final part of my talk. What lies ahead for UK's firms in the Commonwealth members? As I mentioned earlier, the Commonwealth is around mini UN. It's around 54 countries, 1/4 of UN membership. If you combine GDP of these countries, that is 13.5 trillions in 2021. So excluding GDP of UK, that's 3 trillion. So still Commonwealth, excluding UK, $10 trillion market for UK's firms. Just to give you the size of this market, so it is equal to the GDP of Germany, GDP of France, and GDP of Japan added together. Or alternatively, you can think of GDP of China. So in 2021, GDP of China was 12 trillion, but GDP of Commonwealth is 13.5 trillion. So this is a huge market worth exploring into. And this GDP is projected to exceed to 19.5 trillion by 2020. And there's huge demand for imports, and imports are estimated to increase to 6 trillion by 2026. So why it's more important that we have seen in the data again and again that cost of trading with Commonwealth countries is much lower than cost of trading with non-Commonwealth countries. And there are a couple of reasons. One is a common history, common legal system, administrative practices, common language, large diaspora network, and especially for the firms which want to set up business in Commonwealth countries. I'm happy to mention that 60% of Commonwealth population is youth. So there's enough labor workforce which is tech savvy, so there's ample opportunity to harness this labor force. and the firms which want to export to Commonwealth markets. So this is population of 2.5 billion. So there's a huge demand for consumption in these countries. Next, please. So this demand is distributed across 6 regions. So there are some countries in East Asia, some in middle of Africa. So there's huge regional trade between them. So there's huge opportunities all over the globe. So I don't want to go in detail. So let's move on. So here you see the breakup of the demand in Commonwealth countries by goods, by sector, and by region. This is the global import of these countries from Africa, from the world. So you can see these countries have more imports than exports, especially in Asia and Africa. So this negative number means that there's a huge demand for imports, and there's a potential for UK's firm to intervene in these markets. And overall, there's, as I mentioned, the market of 4.3 trillions. But if you see the population, Asia is the huge market, followed by Africa, and but Caribbean and Pacific states, there's a huge demand for services, especially travel and tourism and hospitality services. So if you are engaged in manufacturing, so maybe worth looking into African and Asian Commonwealth members. And if you are more into services, travel, tourism, then Pacific members and Caribbean states might be worth looking into. Next, please. So this brings me to the end of my talk. So for the final, before I stop, the final thing I would like to mention, as we are moving to the digital era after the COVID, there is a huge opportunity to getting and to engage with digital trade with Commonwealth countries. What we have seen in the last 2 years, Commonwealth countries had a huge uptake of digitization, and more than 50% services in Commonwealth countries are now delivered through digital means. So these services mean education, health, financial services, insurance services. So you can see this chart that all Commonwealth region, developed countries, Africa, Asia, so they have huge uptake of digital services in the last year. So I will stop here, and I look forward to thoughts of fellow panelists and lively discussion afterwards. Back to you, William.
Thank you, Salamat. And on the next slide, I think there's some details about how you can contact Salamat. That will be in the pack, which we'll share with everyone afterwards. But thank you, that was really interesting. Some really interesting points there, particularly the shift from products to services, and also really interesting to hear about digitalization as well. We're doing a webinar next week, in fact, about steps traders can take to prepare for digitalization, which I'll send a link to in the chat in a moment. We're going to do another poll now, and then we'll do a couple more questions for Salamat. So the poll here is asking, what is your main obstacle to trading more of the Commonwealth? And hopefully you can see the options there. Salamat, I'll do one question now because we've got Sangeeta lined up, and yeah, I want to have some time at the end for questions. So the question is from Harry, who asks, what advantages does the UK have in Commonwealth markets in the current geo-economic situation?
Thanks, Harry. This is a very interesting question. I would say actually it's $1 million question. If you see the current trading landscape of the UK as well as the whole world, there are 3 issues firms and companies are facing all over the world. One is the higher energy and food costs. There's the food insecurity and higher energy prices. And second is this stress in the supply chains. There's a talk of recalibration and reshoring of, and third is the main consideration is ESG compliance, which firms have to do in long term. So Commonwealth offers you advantage on all these 3 fronts. If you need to import food or oil or energy products, so Commonwealth countries are big producers of that. Malaysia is big producer of palm oil. India is big producer of wheat. And Canada is another big producer of food products. So in the current challenges, the food security issues, so Commonwealth can help to provide these things. In the medium term, as you are moving toward the reorientation of trade policy to other markets, so firms know better than me that the supply chains tend to be very sticky. So this is time to enter into this market. And there's a very common saying nowadays, this global value chain, a supply chain, you want to put your value in the countries where you share the values. And Commonwealth share these values of common language, common culture, common legal system. So it might be worth looking into, because this is another advantage. And finally, coming to my third point, that companies have more stress nowadays for ESG compliance, for sustainable trade. And I'm happy to mention that many Commonwealth countries have the most sustainable production and trade practices in the world. So as you are moving into the decarbonization and greener trade, so Commonwealth offers more opportunities than the rest of the world. So I can stop here and we can discuss further after the presentation of Sangeeta.
Thank you, Salamat. And I know you'll have to go a little bit before the hour mark, so hopefully we'll get to a few questions for you before you have to go. But I'm going to share the results to that poll. Thank you, everyone, for responding. A quarter of you say it's the lack of trade deals with preferential tariffs, which is the main obstacle. So it's great to hear all the work's been done from DIT at the moment, from Paul earlier. And then 20% lack of market access or export skills, 18% geographical distance, and 16% other non-tariff barriers. And I guess at this point, if we can move to the next slide, it'd be great to bring on Sangeeta, who's hopefully going to be joining us from Kigali. Hi, Sangeeta, how are you and how is it over in Kigali? We can't hear you, you're on mute.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can now hear you, over to you.
Perfect. I might have to go offline because the connection here is not great. Hello, everybody. I'm speaking from Kigali, attending CHOGM 2022, and I'm reporting right from the heart of action. I'm in the speakers lounge of the Business Forum, and yes, I'll go off the webcam and just keep my audio on if that is okay. Thank you so much. So, as we all know, let me just give you a bit of background about what's been happening here. So the meetings started literally on Sunday. And interestingly enough, well, there are leaders from all countries. 54 countries have gathered in Kigali, Rwanda this week. And this is for the 6th time the event has been hosted by an African country, and for the first time by Rwanda. There are over 5,000 participants from government, businesses, civil society, and the theme of this session, of this meeting, was delivering a common future, connecting, innovating, transforming. There are 4 forums that have been held. The first couple of days were devoted to, the first day was for youth. The next couple of days were devoted to women. The next day was devoted to businesses and civil society. Now, this has all culminated with the official retreat for leaders on Saturday. Now, as we all know, all leaders retreat, which is very unique to the Commonwealth, and all the heads of government meet privately to discuss about collaboration on global and Commonwealth priorities. So just a bit of a background there. I apologize for the background noise, but I'm sorry I have no control over it. So let me just quickly allude to what are the main issues that are being discussed at CHOGM. Essentially, you can actually list the themes under several categories. First and most importantly, there has been a lot of discussion about how COVID has impacted economies and how the impact has varied between different Commonwealth countries. Second, the focus has been heavily on climate change and how is it countries can work together to address climate action. Third, there has been a lot of discussion about how we can empower women within the Commonwealth, because there is now great increasing recognition that women empowerment is a must, and trade could be used as a means to empower women, which would eventually lead to higher growth rate and development. And we can talk about that should there be any questions. Another topic that has been heavily discussed is about the Sustainable Development Goals. So they are very much in the limelight. And leaders at CHOGM are connected to harnessing lessons learned, working together, taking inspiration from innovative solutions. So as a result of this, there's been a lot of discussion on how to harness technology for development, for women empowerment, alternate sources of energy. How is it they can provide countries, especially that are economically vulnerable, especially the 32 small island developing states, which are economically vulnerable, to climate change, how can we provide them with more access to finance, and also support them with some debt sustainability mechanisms. So it's been great seeing in action how the leaders, business leaders, thought leaders, political leaders have been discussing and championing the cause of their countries and bringing to the to the forefront how countries are intrinsically interlinked through globalization, and how they are not immune to economic shocks, and how important it is to increase resilience of these countries. So these are some of the main issues that have been discussed over the last 4 days. Let me allude to UK's trade with Commonwealth. Now, I will go back to 2020 statistics, and when we look at 2020 statistics, we see that the Commonwealth accounted for 8.7% of UK's total trade. Now, this is just a little shy of UK's total trade with Germany. Nevertheless, this tells us that the Commonwealth is actually a very important trading bloc for the UK. If we translate this into value terms, we see that the total value of exports were 56.3 billion. So UK exports to the Commonwealth were 56.3 billions, and imports, UK imports from the Commonwealth were 48.2 billions. As Salamat has already mentioned, that trade fell, and that trade was negatively impacted in 2020. And it's no surprise that the value of UK exports to the Commonwealth also fell during the same time. So it fell by nearly 16% between 2019 and 2020, but the value fell even more, nearly by 25%. And the main reason why trade contracted so much in 2020 compared to 2019 is essentially attributed to disruptions in value chains within the context of economic international trade caused by the coronavirus. And this was a point that has been repeatedly been alluded to by business leaders, by policymakers, by politicians. And there is a very keen there are very keen efforts ongoing to make sure that all countries can be increasingly resilient. And as I mentioned, there's been a special ministerial this time for the Commonwealth 32 small island developing states on the 22nd of June. Now, when we look at trade patterns between the UK and the Commonwealth, we see that UK's trade with Commonwealth is heavily focused on 5 countries. And these countries are Australia, Canada, India, Singapore, and South Africa. And you know, the share of these countries' trade is nearly 70%, 74% of UK's exports to the Commonwealth. So they represent a very important chunk of UK trade. Now, if we start looking at trade patterns through the lens of the global value chains, we find that the UK is a very major hub for the Commonwealth countries, and it specializes, and most exports are services. Let me go on to the challenges that firms face in sending goods to the Commonwealth markets. Now, UK firms research shows, and also speaking to businesses that I have been meeting over the last few months and also at Chogam, it comes out loud and clear that UK firms face barriers, and these barriers are both tariff and non-tariff barriers for cross-border opportunities in Commonwealth markets. Now, we know that most developing countries have actually higher level of tariffs, and it is as a result of this tariff that we need to start thinking how to bring down these tariffs. And the UK is making efforts in the right direction by doing trade agreements which aim to bring tariffs to a very low or zero level. Now, the most important actually are the non-tariff barriers. And so if you look at it, you can classify them as horizontal barriers, which are essentially generic. i.e., these non-tariff measures are the ones that affect several product groups and sectors. So they are uniformly spread across all sectors. And if we look at these barriers are broad, these are common measures, and these, for example, include custom procedures, weak IPR protection, licensing requirements, SPS requirements that are not really aligned with the international standards. So basically, there are also measures which affect competitiveness. For example, in most developing economies, we find there are special guidelines on the minimum content requirements. There are price control measures. So it is as a result of these measures that businesses get impacted when they try to access a new market in the Commonwealth countries. This is primarily for goods. If we look at services, we see that the main barriers actually relate to foreign entry, movement of people, a lack of regulatory transparency. And in fact, it's the lack of regulatory transparency, which is actually the most important barrier that affects businesses in accessing Commonwealth markets. And there's been a lot of focus on this aspect as well within CHOGM. And there were several sessions which actually looked at how is it we could facilitate business, what measures could be done, could be taken by policymakers, by governments to ensure that countries are able to trade more, because we all know about the Commonwealth advantage. We know that trade costs are essentially less, at least by 20%, when Commonwealth countries trade amongst each other. But nevertheless, there is scope to reduce there is scope to enhance the benefits from the Commonwealth advantage if we undertake special trade facilitation measures, and that has really been the eye of the discussion. I will stop here, Will, and I'm happy to take questions.
Many thanks, Sangeeta, and so great that you were able to join us from Kigali as well. But some really interesting points there, particularly around some of the challenges. And yeah, great to hear what's being discussed in CHOGM as well. Great to have that on the front line information. So thank you so much for that. We're now going to address some of your questions. It's my delight to welcome back Paul. Unfortunately, Salamat's had to drop off a bit early, but yeah, we'll begin with a question for Sangeeta from Maria, and it's particularly pertinent. Paul will probably have a view on this as well, particularly given it's the 6th year anniversary of the Brexit referendum today. So Maria asks, what advantages are there for businesses in trading in Commonwealth markets versus trading in Europe? Sangeeta, do you want to start on that one?
Hi, yes, thank you. Well, what comes to my mind is that there are historical links between the UK and Commonwealth countries, and it is the history that binds countries together. And most importantly, I think the advantages of working with Commonwealth countries and doing business with them is that most countries have the same language, which is English. And this is something that was binding most of, almost all countries that came here, all the 54 country representatives. And very important is the rule of law, because this is something that has been inherited as a result of the historical links. So these are the 2 points I think that really stand out loud and clear when you ask me about advantages of doing business.
Paul, is there anything you'd like to add from your end on that question?
Yeah, I think I equally go back to, there's a point equally in any trading relationship where it's a trusted buyer and a trusted seller. And before I had this job, I spent 4 years in Hong Kong, and our exports to Hong Kong, might surprise you, are greater than our exports to India. And it's because there's a very long history and a very long set of relationships that have grown up over a long period of time, and that's led to a very strong trading partnership between the two areas. Of course, lots of the trade that goes on is destined for China and the wider Asian market, but nonetheless, it's a trusted party. And I think particularly because businesses in the UK have had to adapt to the new trading relationships with the EU. So we're not, as you know, in a single customs union, single market. So people have had to adapt and learn how to do exporting. Well, if you've managed to adapt and to learn, then actually selling and exporting into further afield trusted markets, isn't that great? Isn't that much more of a greater leap, I think, than it perhaps was before? So I go back to that sort of, you know, building those pipelines of trusted trade corridors between the UK and partners, and you'll be amazed there are some probable, you know, long historic trading partners, companies there already, and how those companies can bring other businesses, particularly smaller businesses, into that equation. I think that would be a really interesting thing to explore.
Will, can I add, following on from Paul's point, which is very useful about trust, a lot of discussion has been ongoing here about the ecosystem of trust and the special trade corridor that is being, the corridor that's being established between Kenya and the UK. So yes, trust is very important.
That's really interesting, and that feeds into the UK's wider border strategy, doesn't it, in terms of the digitalisation? I know the ecosystem of trust is a major part of that. Again, I don't want to overplug our webinar next week on digitalisation, but we'll be talking a lot more about that then. So if you I've posted a link in the chat already, so yeah, have a look at that one. But enough of that, apologies. I'll ask a question to Paul. This comes from Ewan, and this comes to the challenges which are noted earlier. And this is, why should UK businesses be prioritising markets like Australia and New Zealand, given the significant distance between us and them? How does this fit with the UK's move to net zero?
Well, there are a couple of things I would say on this. I mean, first of all, I hope people don't doubt this government's commitment to net zero. We've made it both legally, we published a strategy, and we are filling in the detail of that strategy as we go. I mean, actually, our deals with both Australia and New Zealand have very strong environmental chapters which talk about cooperating on green issues. But you don't get to 2050 overnight, and there will be people who will, you know, make these sort of arguments. Well, let's stop everything now. One of the other things I do, I chair a transport advisory group with all the airline industry, rail industry, etc. They've got huge ambitions around jet zero, around how they will clean up the movement of goods. I think a few things will happen. I think, first of all, you know, more goods, if they can be sourced locally, will be, but actually cleaner methods of moving goods around will also take place. If I equally look at the services side and the digital economy, you know, getting trade deals to facilitate the ability to trade, you know, digitally or through services, I think equally they're relevant and they're important in terms of those trade deals. Final point from me would be, sometimes you can start off selling goods, and that can lead you to opening, you know, an entity in that country, and that can lead you to creating production in that country, creating jobs in that country. So it's not always what starts off as a simple sale. Sometimes can turn into quite an expansionist endeavour for your business. So I think, yes, there's going to be some contradiction until a lot of these new technologies have made their way into commonplace, but we will get there, I'm confident.
Thank you, Paul. I guess that's an important point. Not all trade is containers on ships. It's it can lead to many things. But yeah, I'll try to get through a few more questions in the remaining time. We've had a few people asking about trade shows and also kind of the support available for meeting importers in markets. I saw actually today or yesterday the new UK trade show programme was open for applications. I don't know, Paul, that's probably one you'd want to tackle, so kind of trade show support and meeting buyers in markets.
Gosh, you're testing my memory, but I think from memory, and don't shoot me if I get into the facts wrong, but we've now published an extensive program through to the end of the financial year, I think from memory there was about 60 to 90 shows. I can't get the numbers completely correct. People, if it's a short flight, people can get some financial assistance up to around £250. I think it's more if it's a long haul flight. If you're an exhibitor, then the average grants, I think, from what I'm seeing, are up around the £3,000 to £4,000. So if you feel like you'd like to get involved in these, I would say use the scheme, apply. And actually, on a really important thing, over recent years, governments had all these sort of grant funding schemes. There was one around Brexit. There's another called the Internationalisation Fund. And we do put them out there, but the take-up is always quite low. Now, obviously, pandemic will have affected that. Please use this money, because the more you use it, the more we can go to the Treasury and say we need more. So if you're interested in going to those trade shows, brilliant opportunity to meet buyers, potential partners, distributors, etc. So I'd really encourage people to look at that. And I don't know, Will, if you can stick the link into where that is on Gov.uk on the side.
Yeah, I'll try to find the link in a moment, and I think we're actually covering it in our daily update today, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I'll post a link momentarily. Sangeeta, just in terms of meeting buyers in markets, do you have any tips or advice for companies?
Sorry, the level of noise is very high. Can you repeat the question, please?
No worries at all. In terms of how companies can meet importers in Commonwealth markets, do you have any kind of suggestions or tips for kind of how companies can do that?
Well, let's look at the conventional method, which has always been meeting at trade fairs, right? But now I see when I met businesses here at the Business Forum, interestingly enough, I see that a lot of them are using social media very effectively and efficiently to link up. Let me give you an example of a woman based out of Rwanda who has been successful in exporting chia seeds that we all eat for breakfast to the UAE, and she sent a full shipment load, so you can imagine how. So my question to that woman, because she attended the Business Forum, was, how did you manage to collect or grow so much of chia seed that you could export a whole container load? And it was brilliant. The answer was, I went on social media, I used social media very effectively, and I reached out to all women entrepreneurs within the region. And lo and behold, she asked them to package chia seeds, one kilogram packet each, and she managed to get a container load full. So look at the power of the internet and social media. I've got loads of examples to share, and I'm very happy to share examples like this that have been reported by different businesses. And in fact, I was proposing that women entrepreneurs like this need special mention, especially when it comes to She Trades program, because that is what the objective of the program is all about: empowering women to be able to buy, sell, connect, link up. And in fact, She Trades is playing a very important role here in Africa, because what it does is it has followed a hub approach. So in Rwanda, it has a hub, and this lady has now become an important part of the hub as well. I mean, so it's brilliant. There are amazing stories I'm hearing about people using social media to be able to link up.
Thank you, Sangeeta. It sounds like we should do another webinar just on those case studies. It's great to hear. We're running low on time, but I saw one really good question, which I just wanted to put to Paul from Scott before we finish. And Scott asked, he would like to understand what aggressive promotion for trade is being made. We see lots of press portraying the UK as having made a big mistake abandoning the EU for our global goals, and that has had a negative influence on business confidence. How can we fix this? I mean, this is a huge question, Paul, but you've addressed it a little bit in some of the previous answers. But do you want to recap, Scott?
Well, I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? But we have a terrible habit of beating ourselves up in the UK and not really being proud of what we've got to sell. And it's quite incredible, as I I refer back to my time in Hong Kong, looking back at the UK. You'd be amazed at how positively the UK is viewed by other markets. They like a lot of the things that we create. They trust us. They value our approach to things. And of course, there's been an inordinate amount of noise around Brexit and its impact. And actually, if you follow the numbers, those numbers are coming back around. It's definitely changed the makeup of trade between sectors, but you can see the numbers are slowly going in the right direction. I mean, the whole idea around publishing the export strategy last November and the Made in the UK, Sell to the World campaign was a opportunity to try and reset and re-promote and try and re-energize, frankly, the British business community and ambition to trade overseas. You don't do it just once, you just keep at it. And in total, between events, missions, trade shows between the UK and overseas, we will be running around 1,300 events supporting tens of thousands of business, and we just have to keep doing that. And the final thing I would just plug is we have this network of 400 export champions, and these are businesses who started off with just the thing they were doing, very domestically focused, and the story and the journey they've all been on. And they play a little bit to Sangeeta's point before about the lady with chia seeds. Once you hear these stories and hear about how these businesses use their imagination to grow, it should give, hopefully, some of those folks on your poll who were in the might do it, won't do it, just a bit of confidence to take the next step. Reach out to our Export Academy, see if there's something you can learn there. The Institute's another great place to come to if you want to sort of start having the conversation, because there is a killer fact in the UK. 1 in 7 businesses in the UK has a product that they know they could sell overseas, or a service, but they don't. That's a big missed opportunity.
On that note, I think we have hit the witching hour. So thank you for the rousing end there. And if we move into the last slide, I'd now like to thank Paul, Sangeeta, and Salamat for your time today. And great to have someone from Kigali as well, but also someone from government. So it's been really great having such a fantastic panel for today's webinar. And I hope everyone has found that really interesting. So yeah, the Institute does, as Paul said, it continues to be on hand to support businesses to trade compliantly during an ever-changing trade landscape, whether that's due to Brexit, climate change, or the war in Ukraine. Export.org.uk is where you can find out more information about our services. Just a reminder that we will be sending all registrants a recording of today's webinar along with a copy of the slides over the next day or so. But please do get in touch if for any reason this email doesn't come through to your main inbox. As you leave, please do let us know what you thought of today's webinar and any suggestions for topics on future webinars by completing the exit survey. But for now, thank you everyone for joining us. Sorry we slightly overrun, but it's goodbye from London and goodbye from Kigali.